Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to be talking about factoring completely. So factoring completely just means we need to keep factoring it until it can't be factored anymore. Usually this means that we're going to use one or more of our factoring techniques. So usually it starts with a GCF. Alright, so every single time we say to factor, the first thing you should always look for is, does it have a GCF? If it does, then factor that out first. After that, we're going to look at how many terms it has. So if it has two terms, then that would be difference of squares. If it had three terms, then we know that that would be split B. And if it has four terms, then we know that we could factor that by grouping it. So let's look at this first one. First thing we need to ask ourselves is, does it have a GCF? In this case, yes, it does. A 3 will go into all the numbers, and all of them have an x. So we're going to factor out that GCF first. So take out the 3x. So we're going to have 3x on the outside. And when we divide all of these off, we're going to have 3x squared plus 5x plus 2. All right, now the 3x is just going to keep getting brought down. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw an arrow down here somewhere where I think our final answer is going to be, so that I don't forget to put it on our final answer. We can ignore it until then though. But our next step is going to be to factor this part. So this part has three terms. So we know that for three terms that we can use split B. So we make our chart. A times C is 6 and B is 5. So factors of 6 are 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Everything's positive, so everything stays positive. If we add these up, we get 7 and 5, which means 2 and 3 are the ones that we want. And we can go ahead and do the splitting. So we're going to have 3x squared plus 2x plus 3x plus 2. We put them into groups. So for the first group, we have a GCF of x, which means when we take out the x, it's going to be x times 3x plus 2. For our second group, we have a GCF of just 1, because they don't have anything in common. So it's going to be plus 1 times 3x plus 2. Insides match. So we're going to have 3x plus 2 times x plus 1. And then don't forget about that 3x. So we drew that little arrow to remind us that at the very end, 3x needs to go on to our answer. All right, let's look at the second one. So for the second one, again, start off by looking for a GCF. So in this case, the GCF would just be 2. So we're going to divide all of these by 2. So we're going to have 2 times 3x squared minus 13 minus 10. All right, now the 2 is just going to come down to the end. And we need to factor this part now. So we go ahead and make our chart. A times C will be 3 times negative 10, which is negative 30. And our B will be negative 13. So factors of 30, 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6. B is negative, so we know that all of our bigger numbers need to be negative. And AC is negative, which means they need to be different signs, so that part's already covered. So we can go ahead and add these up. We would get negative 29, negative 13, negative 7, and negative 1. The negative 13 is the one we're looking for, so these are our factors. So we're going to go ahead and split B now. So 3x squared comes down, then plus 2x, which, sorry, there should have been x there, minus 15x minus 10. All right, now we can group it. So GCF of the first group would just be x. GCF of the second group would be negative 5. So we take an x out, we get x times 3x plus 2, and then negative 5 times 3x plus 2. Insides match, so since the insides match, we're going to have 3x plus 2 times x minus 5, and then don't forget that 2 comes down to our final answer, and we're done. All right, so for example 3, again, we're looking for GCF first. So in this case, GCF would just be 3. All right, so we're going to divide both of these by 3. And if we do that, we're going to get 3 times t squared minus 64. Now the 3 is just going to come down to our final answer. And the t squared minus 64, that's what we want to factor again. So since that has 2 terms, we're going to use difference of squares. So the square root of t squared would just be t. Square root of 64 would be 8. So we're going to make 2 parentheses. The t goes in the first spot. 8 goes in the second spot. Plus in one, minus in the other. And then we don't forget that 3. All right, example 4. So for example 4, start with the GCF. And in this case, since it starts with a negative, we're actually going to make the GCF negative 3. So we're going to start by dividing each one of these by a negative 3. So we have negative 3 times x squared plus x minus 6. All right, the negative 3 is just going to come down, and we're going to factor the rest of this. It has 3 terms, so we can factor using split b. So our a times c is negative 6. Our b would just be 1. Factors of 6 are 1 and 6, 2 and 3. b is positive, but AC is negative, so we want them to be different signs, so we make the smaller one negative. And if we add those up, we get 5 and 1, meaning that the factors that we want are negative 2 and 3. So we are going to go ahead and split b. So it's going to be x squared minus 2x plus 3x minus 6. And then we can group them. So divide both these by x and divide both these by 3. And we're going to have x times x minus 2 plus 3 times x minus 2. Insides match. So we're going to have x minus 2 times x plus 3. And that negative 3 is going to come down to our answer. All right, example 5. Oops, sorry. All right, so for example 5, we're going to be factoring this by grouping since it has 4, but first, again, we still need to look for a GCF. So the number that goes in all of these this time would be 6. So we can divide all 4 of these by 6. So we're going to have 6 times x squared plus 5x minus 3x minus 15. All right, the 6 is going to come down to our final answer. And we can just jump straight into grouping this time. Since it's already 4, we don't have to worry about the chart. We just go ahead and start grouping it. So GCF of the first group would be x. So it's going to be x times x plus 5. GCF of the second group would be negative 3. So it's going to be minus 3 times x plus 5. So insides match, which means we're going to have x plus 5 times x minus 3 with a 6 on the outside. All right, last one. So for this last one, our GCF would not be 6, sorry, it would be 9. So we can divide both these by 9. So we have 9 times 4y squared minus 9. This part's just going to come down. And since it has 2 terms left, we can factor this using difference of squares. So the square root of 4y squared would just be 2y. Square root of 9 would just be 3. So we're going to make 2 parentheses. 2y goes in the first one. 3 goes in the second spot in each. Plus in one, minus in the other. And we make sure to put the 9 back. And that's factoring completely. So just make sure that you're always looking for a GCF first, and make sure that when you think you're at the final answer, it can't be factored anymore.